The longer I look at the data, the longer I follow the official narrative, the more I'm convinced that it's all just a scam. It's intentionally warping public perception. Because why? Apparently, the economy is growing year over year, yet most people feel poorer over time. The official narrative is that the GDP just constantly grows. It goes up over time, people become richer. Because what's a GDP number really worth it when it's measured in US dollars and when the number of US dollars is also growing over time? When we are debasing the currency, it makes no sense at all to compare the GDP, say 20 or 30 years from now, to today's GDP. The monetary base, on average, grows by 6.8% per annum. Now that compounds, so over the course of 66 years, we now have 77 times more money floating around. When we measure the GDP in US dollars, it's like measuring a race with an ever accelerating clock. It seems like we are faster and faster, but that's not really what's going on. It's just the clock ticking faster and faster. Or in this case, the US dollar becoming weaker and weaker. So what does the picture look like if we had a constant monetary base? If the monetary base wasn't expanding over time, how would then the GDP develop? The answer is in this chart here, and that's very surprising. This is the US GDP divided by the US money supply. And we did have some growth from 1960 to 1997. The GDP grew slightly by 23%. But since then, since 1997, it actually went down by almost 40%. If the US dollar was not devalued year over year, we actually would measure lower GDP numbers. When the publicly stated GDP is going up, it's actually just a derivative of the US dollar devaluing. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think the system is purposely designed this way. It's designed that way to show numbers like this. This is the real median household income. Real meaning we adjust for the inflation numbers. We do have some growth. This is by the Federal Reserve. So apparently people are becoming a bit richer year over year. How much richer? On average is 0.82% per annum. Not a lot, but at least it's positive. At least times should be better today compared to, say, the 1980s. Now the inflation numbers that are behind this calculation, they are over here. The official stated US Consumer Price Index, it on average grows by 3.3% per annum. That's the dotted line. We've got our fluctuation, and the fluctuation tends to go down over time. 3.3% is what happens long term. So when household incomes on average grow by 0.8% in real terms, in nominal terms, they would go up by 4.1%. So on average, every household has 4.1% more US dollars year over year, and that gives more purchasing power of 0.8% year over year because of inflation. That's the official narrative. Now, doesn't it feel somewhat strange that something's expanding by 6.8% per annum, but apparently its value is going down only by 3.3% per annum? What I think is going on here is that the economy became more productive over time. So it becomes easier and easier to produce consumer goods. If we had a constant monetary base, we actually should see prices come down year over year because of technological progress, because of optimizations. The fact that consumer prices still go up by 3.3% every year just means that we print money so quickly that it gets harder and harder over time to keep up. We have to ask ourselves, what's really closer to reality? Is the money devaluing by 6.8% because its supply grows by 6.8%? Or should we believe the official narrative of 3.3%? This is very important because it's a 3.5% delta. It's the answer. If households really grow their purchasing power by 0.8% per annum, or if they're falling behind on average by 2.8% per annum. If minus 2.8% is the true number, and that's how much it gets harder over time, that means that over the course of 40 years, there's almost a 70% purchasing power reduction. So 32% is left after we compound 0.972 by 40. Now let's have a look at the gold price since then. Did it go up? Maybe by roughly 3x. The answer is it went up even much more than that, by 1,200%. So something that's supposed to hold its purchasing power, it went up by much more than our conspiracy theory of actually losing purchasing power by 2.8% per annum. Apparently, we lose purchasing power much faster even, if we just measure this in gold. I think the system is designed this way, just to keep people calm. If we tell people that household incomes are at all-time highs in terms of real purchasing power, then it's all fine. Everybody is doing all right. Yes, there might be some imbalance in terms of wealth, but overall everybody is doing better. That's the story of capitalism. On average, it might only be 0.82% better year over year, but it's still something. It's still a graph that goes up and to the right. The government would never show the GDP numbers relative to a constant money supply. The government would never tell its people that over the course of 40 years, almost 70% of purchasing power is suddenly siphoned away. But what does this mean? It gets siphoned away. Who suddenly has all the wealth? I think the system is set up this way because there are people that are obviously benefiting from all of this monetary debasement. The money is going somewhere. It's just not coming to the average person. Your paycheck is worth less and less year over year, but your investments, they are keeping up. There is a way to exit this insanity, and that's to hold things that are not the US dollar. If your salary was measured in ounces of gold, or if your salary was measured in parts of the S&P 500, you would be doing fine. This is the S&P 500 relative to the US money supply. Yes, it's not growing much, but at least the inflation tax is completely gone. Here is gold relative to the money supply. Again, the same thing. It might not long-term appreciate, but at least it keeps pace long-term. And of course, recently it outperformed. This whole idea of money printing, of money creation, of expanding the monetary base, it's all in the benefit of the few people that own the capital, that have the vast majority of investments. The system is purposely designed this way, and I don't think it's a coincidence. It's a central banking system. And I think people like Jerome Powell know about this. I don't think that the median household, the average Joe, feels better today than say 10 or 20 years ago. It gets harder and harder to buy a house. It gets harder and harder just to keep up with expenses. This is not an individual problem. This is a broad problem. Not just in the US, but globally. But since we are looking at US data, I don't think that it's a coincidence that the birth rate is constantly going down. It's just harder and harder to take on this additional responsibility. Most people want to have healthy families. Most people want to build lasting relationships, but very few people are able to do that. And purchasing power and financial security is a strong part in that. I think this is a global phenomenon of capitalism. It gets harder and harder just to stay afloat. And that's maybe also why people get more and more picky with their partner, because they know if they don't get a top tier partner, it's pretty much impossible to have a happy life. Being average isn't enough anymore. The vast majority is suffering more and more year over year. The official narrative is different, but I don't trust the official narrative. I don't trust the 3.3% inflation. I think the 6.8% inflation is much more close to reality, because that's how quick a bar of gold even is appreciating over time. And nobody can tell me that a metal rock should actually be worth more long term. It's the same metal rock it was 100 years ago. It should have the same kind of value. And if your thing against a metal rock is going down long term, because that metal rock appreciates with the monetary base, it goes up by 6.8% per annum, and your income does not go up. It only goes up by those 3.3% or maybe by 4.1%. Then obviously things are very much out of balance. And who's benefiting from this? It's the people at the center of the system. It's the people that get very cheap access to credit, that get money at a cheaper rate than the 6.8% per annum, that can debase their debt, that can grow their wealth at the expense of the median household that still believes they're doing okay. And that's the interesting thing about it, because it's the vast majority of people, 90 or 95% of households, that are actually doing worse year over year. It doesn't necessarily feel like this compared to, say, the working colleagues. It only feels like this compared to the small elite. But the small elite is far away. We don't really have a feeling of how much better they are doing. We only have a comparison with our direct working colleagues, for example. But obviously, when you can escape this massive drag, so here's the value of a US dollar, so the inverse of the monetary base. If you're not going down at this pace with your purchasing power, and if you even benefit from that, then you want to keep that system alive. And the issue really is that most people that have understood how to play the system, they normally don't talk about this. In theory, it would be in my interest to never talk about this, right? When I take on cheap debt and I buy Bitcoin and the S&P 500 and gold with that debt, and the debt devalues much faster compared to what I pay in interest, I make money from the system at the expense of most other people. And I shouldn't talk about this because this could potentially lead to a revolution, maybe even. But I think that enough people still have sufficient purchasing power not to revolt. People are not yet hungry. People still have enough money to just buy junk food and scroll on their TikTok feed. And so they are continuously getting exploited by the people that actually take advantage of the system. Again, one easy way to take advantage of all of this is to have very cheap credit. If you can take out a loan and you pay less than 6.8% per annum and you buy something that holds its purchasing power versus the monetary debasement, you are a winner. You are a winner to the degree to how much purchasing power you're generating from those investments. You lose with your active income because it's likely not going to appreciate, let's say you're employed, but you win with your investments. And once that flips, once your investments are large enough and they make more from that interest rate arbitrage relative to how much you're losing because your income doesn't grow as much, at that point you become part of the minority. Learning about investments is not optional anymore. This has real life consequences. I don't have a solution to the system, but I do have a solution for every individual that's willing to put in the effort to beat the system. And with the content here on YouTube, I try to help towards breaking out of the system. If you got some value out of this video, feel free to give it a like. It helps the channel grow. Feel free to also subscribe. I publish videos regularly. See you next time here on YouTube, or potentially also see you in the premium membership. This is where I share my own trades. See you next time. Cheers.